My competitive friend was always insulting my wine, so I tricked him into sampling and insulting his own. So during the pandemic, I got really into making wine. Like really into it. Before that, I hadn't touched brewing in maybe 15 years, but when we all got locked down and the one decent liquor store we could get to closed for like a year straight, I figured why not start up again. I had the time, and honestly, everyone was going crazy without anything to drink. I started small with some basic fruit wines using whatever I could find locally. Apples, berries, anything that would ferment. Pretty soon, I was making mead too, and even figured out how to malt grain to make beer, since the nearest homebrew shop was literally thousands of miles away. Yeah, we lived in a weird spot. Anyway, my stuff turned out pretty decent. Clear, balanced, strong enough to get the job done. Nothing fancy, but it worked. Word got around fast because nobody had any other options. People started trading me things for bottles. Like my neighbor gave me fresh eggs every week for a case of apple wine. Another guy fixed my fence for some mead. It was honestly a pretty sweet setup and kept everyone happy during a really boring time. But this one guy in our group, let's call him Brian, absolutely hated that I was doing this. He made wine too, but his was honestly not great. It was drinkable, I guess, but nothing special. The thing that really got under his skin was that people actually wanted mine. At parties, everyone would drink my stuff, and his bottles would just sit there mostly untouched. His wife would always try to hype up his wine too, which made it even more awkward. Brian started making comments every single time we hung out. If I brought wine to someone's house, he'd make a face and say something like, "Oh, you brought the battery acid," or "Trying to poison us again, huh?" At first I laughed it off because whatever, dude, more for everyone else. But he kept going. Every gathering, every tasting night, every time someone mentioned my wine, he had something negative to say. His wife backed him up too, which I thought was weird. Like she'd agree and say things like, "Yeah, Brian's wine is so much smoother," even when she'd barely touched his own bottles. It became this whole thing where they'd team up to trash talk my brewing whenever they got the chance. One night we organized a big tasting event at someone's house. Basically everyone brought whatever they'd been making or bought, and we'd all sample and talk about it. It was supposed to be chill and fun. I brought a few different batches I'd been working on, including one I was actually pretty proud of. Brian showed up with his wife and immediately started his usual routine. But this time I was ready. See, a few weeks before this, he'd asked me for some tips on his brewing process because one of his batches had turned out especially bad. I helped him out, and he ended up with a decent bottle for once. He gave me one to try, and honestly, it wasn't terrible. I kept it. So at this tasting, I poured everyone's samples from different unmarked bottles. I labeled them with numbers instead of names, so people could judge them blind without knowing who made what. Brian loved this idea because he thought it would finally prove his wine was better than mine. I poured out sample number 6 and handed it to Brian first. He swirled it around in his glass all fancy like he knew what he was doing. Took a big sniff, then he started in. "This is rough," he said loud enough for the whole room to hear. "Way too acidic. Tastes like someone didn't even try to balance it. Honestly, this is exactly the kind of amateur stuff that gives homemade wine a bad name." His wife nodded along. "Yeah, it's pretty harsh. Definitely not smooth at all." Everyone else was kind of quiet because this was supposed to be a fun night and he was being weirdly aggressive about it. A couple people tried their samples and seemed confused because it honestly wasn't that bad. I let him keep going for another minute. He was really on a roll talking about how unrefined it was and how the person who made it clearly didn't know what they were doing. Then I just said it. "Well, you made that one. I didn't want you to feel left out, so I brought the bottle you gave me." The room went completely silent. Brian's face went red. His wife looked like she wanted to disappear into the floor. A few people started laughing but tried to cover it up with coughs. Brian stammered something about how I must have switched the bottles or labeled them wrong, but I just pointed to the number 6 sticker on his bottle that was still sitting on the counter. Same sticker, same wine, his wine. They grabbed their stuff and left within 5 minutes. Didn't say bye to anyone, just shuffled out the door while everyone else stood around trying not to make it more awkward. After they left, everyone finally relaxed and we actually had a good time tasting everything.